I'm Linda Elsigard, founder of the LDN Research Trust. It has been my honour to interview LDN researchers, prescribers, pharmacists and patients from around the world for many conditions. Thank you for joining us.
This evening I'm joined by TJ from the United States, who uses LDN for a very rare autoimmune disease. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Could you tell me what it is you take LDN for? Because I know if I try and say it, I'll get it wrong.
Yes, it's really helped me to work on my pronunciation and spelling. It's called Birdshot, chorioretinopathy. And that's what it's called in the U.S. In the UK, I believe it's more frequently referred to birdshot retinochoroidopathy. And the birdshot refers to areas, vitelliginous areas in the retina that are obvious. That means that there are areas in the retina where there is limited pigmentation, and it looks like a shotgun, birdshot blast, scatter dots, cream-colored dots where there is no pigmentation in the retina. And then the chorioretinopathy refers to the choroid and the retina. And sometimes it's retina choroid and sometimes it's choroid retina, but it's a pathological problem that supposedly this autoimmune disorder only attacks the eye and those areas of the eye. And it's considered a type of uveitis. The uvea is the eyeball, and uveitis is inflammation of the eyeball. So it's a type of uveitis, but it's a very rare type of uveitis.
Mm-hmm. So could you explain and tell us your story of when you first noticed that there was something wrong with you? When was it? How old were you?
You know, it's really interesting because I turn 65 next week, and I've always been off to the optometrist. Since I was in first grade, I wore glasses and contacts, and then I had a retinal detachment in 1998, and it required surgery on the back of my eye, cryo, and a scleral buckle, and they said then I would need early cataract surgery on that eye, and I did. So, and then it was difficult to wear the contacts, and I've always had some visual things going on. I always see the optometrist every year, even more. I started noticing things probably in the late 90s, maybe mid to late 90s. And at this point, I'm in my late 40s or approaching 50. And, it's interesting because I really like my optometrist. But they say, you're getting older, and we can't expect our vision to be perfect anymore. But what I was noticing was difficulty with contrast, if the print wasn't dark enough, or if it was white lettering on black. This is common. Everybody in my age group was having this problem, supposedly. And then I noticed that if I was in a dark place, like in a tunnel, if I was going light to dark or dark to light, it was taking me a very long time for my eyes to accommodate in either direction. And I remember very clearly when Tom and I married in 2004, we went to pick out an engagement ring, and he and the salesperson, I really liked this one diamond, but they said, oh, no, it has a funny yellow cast. And I couldn't see it, but they could. And that was interesting because I already knew that I didn't really trust my color discrimination, and it wasn't huge, but I could tell that my eyes were not quite the same and that it was a little off in the yellows and the greens. Not much, but a little bit. And I just thought, this is one more thing. So I think I've had a simmering case of this since maybe 1995, 2000, something like that. And it was always brushed off as, well, you are getting older. And then it will be 2 years ago in December. Well, I noticed some odd things. Actually, I had cataract surgery in 1990. Oh, let's see. Let me think. In 2008, I had cataract surgery on the one eye that I'd had the retinal detachment on. And I've had 2 other partial detachments as well in my other eye, so a lot of eye stuff. In 2008, after the cataract surgery, I was noticing some odd shapes in my eye, and nobody could explain to me what that was, not the doctor who did the cataract surgery, not my optometrist, who I really, really like a lot, and not my retinologist, who I'd seen quite often. Nobody could explain what it was I was seeing. So I just tried to ignore it. And then it was in December of 2014, so it'll be 2 years ago this holiday season. I was noticing this bubbling in my left eye, which is my weak eye, the detachment eye, the one I've had most trouble with. And I want to add that my vision was very good up until now, and I have no trouble. I need glasses or contacts for distance, and I can read close up. But it seemed like it was getting more challenging to read, tracking the lines and that sort of thing from one end to the other. But I'm highly functional. I was working, and everything was fine. I'm very sensitive if the light isn't really good, being able to see, and all this is age-related, we figure. But then in December, I noticed this bubbling thing in my vision, and I called it my boiling bubble, and it was about the size of a tennis ball at arm's length. And it looked like a boiling bubble. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And I thought, well, as soon as the holidays are over, I'm going to get right into the optometrist. And I did. And I said, oh, dear. So let's send you up to your doctor. It could be cardiovascular. You could be having TIAs or something like that. And so I had a cardiovascular workup. I was sent up for neuroophthalmology. They thought it was a pituitary tumor. It was not. I saw the neuroophthalmologist several times. So many things. Back to my retinologist. Work up for all kinds of labs. I was tested for syphilis several times. I was thinking, well, my goodness, I don't think so. But all kinds of lab work. It was just, I don't know, 50 or more labs, perhaps a lot. And everything pretty much came back negative. I was referred to rheumatology, and rheumatology said I have no systemic disorder and that I'm healthy. And I did feel pretty healthy. And then my neuro-ophthalmologist asked for a fluorescein angiogram, where they inject fluorescein into inside your vein, inside your elbow, and then it's timed very closely. A few seconds later, they start taking photos of your retina, and when you're dilated, and that test revealed that my vessels in my retina were inflamed and leaking. And that was the first clue. My retinologist did that test, and he came out shaking his head, and he said, you have retinal vasculitis. You've got retinal vasculitis. He said that it's always autoimmune. It's lupus or MS or something like that. It's always autoimmune. It's like, really, me? And so, anyway, one thing followed another, and he suggested injecting Avastin into the vitreous, and it was off schedule. And I thought, well, let me do some research on this. And so I went to clinicaltrials.gov to see who was doing research on retinal vasculitis and Avastin, which it's an old chemotherapy drug. It was used for GI-type cancers, I believe. And they found that if they inject it into the vitreous of the eye, that it tends to keep the inflammation down. So when I started researching that, all roads seemed to lead to the KCI Institute at Oregon Health and Sciences University in Portland, Oregon. And I called there, and I saw they were doing research, and I called the chief researcher and said, I want to be in your research project. And he said, well, it won't do you any good because our research is on evaluation, on determining the diagnostics on this sort of thing and not on therapy. And I said, that's okay. I always learn something every time I see a doctor, something new that's helpful. And so I'm willing to be in your research, even though it may not directly help me. And he said, well, you need to be seen by a uveitis specialist. And I said, well, what's that? Mm-hmm. And they have uveitis specialists there. So I got a referral, and we went down, and I was seen and have been followed at the KCI Institute for over a year now. So I first started having the bubbling in December of 2014. And it took from December until July, many tests, many doctor appointments, just all over the place, looking for anything. It took until July, 7 months, for me to get a diagnosis. And at the KCI Institute, they asked for a lab called HLA-A29, and that's a genetic test, and that was what was the clincher. HLA-A29 is a gene. And I call it the red hair gene. It's not the red hair gene, but it's a pretty common gene, and it occurs in 1 of 7 people who are of European descent. I guess this does not occur in the Asian population, but 1 of 7 people have this gene, but they don't know what triggers it to become Birdshot chorioretinopathy. And I did have the gene, and I did have the symptoms, and so that was the diagnosis 7 months later in July of 2015. And so I've been followed by the KCI Institute since then for this disorder. They do various tests, ERGs, which is electroretinography, where they can test how the microvoltage of your retina, the various cells, whether they're responding to light and dark, advanced visual fields, fluorescein angiography, what's the other one? Green, I can't think of what it's called, something green angiography, OCTs, advanced OCTs. I get all kinds of tests, and they've been following me. But the doctor recommended when I got this diagnosis that the standard treatment for it was prednisone, starting at 50 milligrams. Tapering slowly over probably about 3 months, and followed by methotrexate or a similar chemo drug, it would be injected, I believe, once a week. And I don't remember the dose on that, but it seems like it was something in the neighborhood of 15 or 20 milligrams of methotrexate, and that would be increasing over time. And as my doctor headed for the prescription pad, I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'd already heard about the treatment for this, and I decided that I'm fit, I'm active, I'm still working with pediatric cases in speech pathology, cheek to cheek, with lots of little runny-nosed kids, all of whom have their fingers in their nose and mouth, and I just did not feel that I could lower my immune resistance and work with a pediatric population like I do. Children are wonderful, and that's just what they do. And I get exposed to lots of things. So I was opposed to the methotrexate, and I'd been on prednisone before, and I said, I'll never do that again. I've actually changed my mind about prednisone. I've said, yes, I will be on prednisone again sometime if I have a life-threatening condition, but not for this. And she also offered to just do the methotrexate or other immunomodulating therapy, and I have refused that as well. So that was in about July or August last year, 2015, and I have followed up with acupuncture and Chinese herbs, which my herbologist prescribes, and I decoct. It's quite a process to cook them and strain them and everything at home. And I did that. I continue to do that, although I've not been taking the herbs for the last several months. And then my acupuncturist is also a registered nurse, And I believe it was in about November or December last year, she said, "Have you heard about Low Dose Naltrexone?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, this is an interesting approach, and I think you should look at it." And so I did quite a bit of reading about it, and at first I thought, oh, this is way too far out there. But I decided, what do I have to lose? So I started taking LDN in January. It was actually on January 20th this year, 2016. And I got the prescription from my naturopath here locally, who was kind of familiar with it, but maybe not too. And we started out with 2 milligrams at bedtime. I'm familiar with the placebo effect, and I always joke with my psychologist husband that all I ever wanted was a good placebo because they don't have any side effects, you know.
True.
So I was expecting a placebo effect, and I took the first dose on January 20th, and the next morning I woke up. Oh, and by the way, between December and July of 2015, my symptoms increased and increased and increased. And it went from just my left eye to both eyes, and the bubbling was not only the size of a tennis ball at arm's length, but it filled pretty much the most of both visual fields. And so it became both eyes, both fields, full fields, and a sensitivity to light. I wanted to wear sunglasses if there was any brightness. My eyes were achy and tired. Lots of different kinds of light flashes, different kinds of colors and sizes and types of flashes. And but probably the bubbliness was the most disconcerting. And I learned to kind of look through it, try to ignore it, because I knew that what it was that was going on. And I could still drive. My vision's good enough to drive, but I didn't trust that if a deer ran across the road or if something came quickly from the side that I might not catch it in time. We live in a place where my drive to work is 7 miles. It takes me 10, 15 minutes, and there's not any heavy traffic, and or I drive, but I stay off the freeways, and I limit my driving, and I don't drive at night. That's the other thing, my night vision, they call it nyctalopia, and I have very poor night vision. And I'm fine in a familiar area, but when I'm in an unfamiliar area, I'm a little bit fearful because I know I don't see well. And this is expected to progress, and it's potentially blinding. And by blinding, you know, it doesn't mean that you lose all of your sight, but it means you have very poor vision and probably a very narrow field of vision as well. My mother has macular degeneration, and so I understand. My mother's blind. She would never call herself blind, and she has a lot of difficulties. But it's not like everything becomes black. It just becomes very challenging. And I understand that. So I started the LDN. The next morning I woke up and I thought, oh, this is a great placebo, because the bubbling was all gone.
Really? The next morning?
Yeah. The next morning. It's like, oh, man, you know, I'm such an unbeliever. I said, oh, this is a great placebo. I love it. It was gone, yeah. But it persisted. And the problem has been that what I was noticing was breakthrough symptoms. And toward the end of the day, I was having more symptoms after about 4 o'clock. And so I think that was about the time that I spoke with you, and I learned that, well, you know, some people need twice daily dosing or even 3 times daily dosing. And so working with the naturopath and the dosing, we started bringing it up to a higher level, twice a day, more. And each time I increased the dose, it was far better.
Really?
But then but then I would have breakthrough symptoms. And I've been keeping a journal since January of the dosing level. I created my own scale, like the 0 to 10 pain scale. Mine's the 0 to 5 vision scale that I created and labeled myself. And my vision had been between 4 and 5 as far as the bubbliness, and I listed the criteria, and it had not been at a 0 to 1 for a long time. But I had periods of time where I was at 1 to 2 very often and usually. But I was really trying to get it down to 1 or less on my scale of 0 to 5. What's happened over time, various things have come up. I had an injection, a steroid injection for some bursitis, and that was in my butt for ischial tuberosity. And they said, no, this won't affect you systemically. But that was actually at a time when I was increasing the LDN. I got that injection, and I found that the LDN was working really great. And I actually lowered the dose, and I had no symptoms for over 2 weeks. Perfect vision. I really think it was probably the added involvement of the steroid injection, even though they said that I wouldn't notice it in any other way. After that started to wear off in about 2 to 4 weeks, the symptoms came back, the visual symptoms, and I was discouraged, couldn't understand what had gone on during that time. My dosage has been increasing. I had a dental problem where I had to have oral surgery in September, and once they talked about what I was going to go through, I stopped the LDN, anticipating that I was going to need some painkillers, and my symptoms came back with a vengeance. They were really vivid, full field, while I was off the LDN. So I know that it's working. But the problem has been, and since I've been back on the LDN, I was off for about 3 weeks during the dental problems. Never really needed any pain medication, but I was afraid I would. I've been back on the LDN, and currently I'm at a level where I'm uncertain if I should take any more. I'm on 3 times daily dosing. I take 5 milligrams at bedtime, which is usually about 11 o'clock, and 4 milligrams upon rising in the morning around 7 or 8. And then in the afternoon between 3 and 4, I take another 4. So that's a total of 13 milligrams, 5, 4, and 4. And I don't have good advice here. We live it's the state capital, but nobody really knows about this. And I don't feel like I have good medical advice. I have a prescriber, but what I'm finding right now, I'm discouraged again because my symptoms are breaking through and inconsistently. And I've kind of said, well, I'm not going to take any more than this, and nobody really knows how much I should be taking. But my dosage level has been creeping up. The good news, though, and it's really excellent news, is that after being followed at the KCI Institute for a full year, I've had testing 3 times in the last year. Even though my ophthalmologist there, my uveitis specialist, said that I would expect to be functionally blind within 5 to 10 years because this is a progressive disorder and I have a moderate to severe case. I have had no decrement in my vision in a full year.
That's good.
Yeah, and I consider that a huge win to have had the last year of my life when I'm still working, where I have not been on prednisone, I have not been on any immunomodulating therapy, and my vision has not decreased. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but right now I'm satisfied, but I'm also a little discouraged that I have some breakthrough symptoms.
Okay.
But I'm going to continue with it.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Of all the different doctors and patients that I've spoken to, you are the first person I know of who's been taking LDN 3 times a day. I've never heard of 3 times a day.
Yeah, right.
How would you feel of experimenting and going back? Because I know there are doctors out there and patients who take it twice a day, like 12 hours apart.
Yes.
How would you feel about going back and just doing it twice a day? So you're not blocking those receptors.
Yes, I've considered that, but I don't have any knowledgeable person. I have a prescriber, but I can't say, even though he's working very well with me, I can't say that I have anybody very knowledgeable who's working with me on this. And it has occurred to me to reduce the dose. But I'm not quite sure where to go with that.
I mean, if you did it 4.5 twice a day, your body wouldn't see it as 9. It would only see it as 4.5 twice, because
I understand.
It's gone before the next one. But maybe we can talk about that, and I might be able to come up with some suggestions for you, Dr. Weiss.
I need a plan that way. Thank you.
Yes. But what I was going to say as well, I've got MS. I've had lots of visual problems. Also, I find it very hard for my eyes to adjust in the dark, backwards and forwards with light. I also have to wear sunglasses in a supermarket and things because the light is too bright.
Right.
I have migraines. I don't have bubbling eyesight or anything like you have. But if I go from light to dark too quickly, it can set off a migraine. I'm just wondering if that bubbling causes really, severe headaches, migraines.
I have some interesting medical history. I used to have migraines, and they were really bad. After menopause, those have pretty much faded away. I haven't had a migraine in maybe 10 years, or if I do, they're very mild. So I do have a history of migraine. My triggers were usually sleep disruption or foods, the typical things. But you're right, and there are the big stores where they have intensely bright lighting, grocery stores, and here in the U.S. Costco type warehouse stores where the lights are very intense. They really bother me after about 5 or 10 minutes. I've not worn sunglasses in there, but I try to limit my exposure in those stores. And my husband's been shopping with me a lot lately and helping me because I get in a store and I get more bubbly, and it just makes me feel very weird. Not a headache, but just very strange. Sometimes maybe lightheaded. And then it becomes very difficult if you're trying to read labels or something like that. It's almost impossible. And I'm a label reader. So I have had that. The other thing that's interesting in my history, besides the retinal detachments, I had a full detachment with cryo and a scleral buckle on one eye, and I have had 2 partial detachments on the other eye, which also had just laser repairs. And I had trigeminal neuralgia in, I believe it was 2007, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a horrible pain disorder, neurological disorder. I had it on my everything seems to be on my left side, on the left third branch, the jaw branch, where I would get these terrible electrical shock type pains that would just leave me very disabled. And that went on for about 6 months, the first half of 2007, in 3 waves. I was really disabled by that, and then it kind of went away. I can't help but think that these things might be sort of related, and I've asked that question. I said to my doctor, I said, what are the odds that I would have a rare disorder like trigeminal neuralgia on the left side of my face, and then less than 10 years later have birdshot started on the left side, but it's both sides, which is even rare. I said, my statistics professor would tell you that these things have to be related. And my doctor said they're both autoimmune and so I'm suspicious of everything now being autoimmune, including my history of migraine and other things. And I understand that people like myself with Birdshot have about a 25% of having another autoimmune disorder as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they seem to go hand in hand. My husband refers to autoimmune disorders as ISIS. It's like a guerrilla group, and you may suppress it in one area, and it'll crop up in another where you least suspect it.
Okay, so if we let Tom have a talk.
Well, I've heard my name Thomas. I'm a doubting Thomas. I like to see the data. I've done research a lot of my life. I'm mostly a clinician, though, and have created programs. And so one of in mental health care. And so one of my things that I try to do rather well is observe differences and changes in people and while they're going through something, and in this case, LDN. And I really, it was noticeable rather immediately. I wasn't quite sure when she took the medication and what to expect. However, it surprised me and surprised her as well, I believe, that she was immediately reporting a improvement in the primary symptoms. So I thought, well, if she did, this could just be a fluke or a placebo or something like that, strong suggestion. But then, this persisted, and for me, knowing whether something is working or not is if you stop it. Certainly blind tests are the best, research design test. That's blind, but in this case, she had some other dental work done. There were going to be opiates involved, so she stopped the medication and went through the dental process. And one morning, I was watching her. I bring her coffee in the morning to kind of nudge her toward consciousness, and I could tell she was distressed. And I said, "What's happening?" And she's not to lead her, but she said, the symptoms are back. Said, what do you attribute that to? And, well, I'm not taking the LDN, of course. Mm. And so the period of pain passed around the dental work, and she resumed the LDN, and the symptoms, I think, have gotten better, probably back to the original effect. I worried a little bit, there's with antidepressant medications, and I'm not an expert in this, but I hear a lot of discussions around if an antidepressant is working and you stop it and then you come back to it later, it doesn't help. There's a name for that phenomenon, but I can't quite remember it. But so I was a little worried that may happen. What I have noticed too is that TJ's happier, friendlier to everyone. She's not as cautious. We walk around the neighborhood, and I'm kind of her guide dog. and that actually has shifted a bit since she's been on the medication. She walks the neighborhood by herself if I'm busy or gone. She actually gets out and has made friends with all the neighbors' dogs, and so there's more independence, but when the sun goes down, things shift a bit. I don't think she's a vampire, but there's a definite shift in her ability to see, which is true of a lot of us. I mean, it's as you age, it seems like the optic nerve and all the apparatus don't function quite as well. But and I really don't want her driving after sundown. Mm-hmm. We live about as far north as you do, so our days are very short in the wintertime. So her driving is restricted in the winter. So that's something I have to attend to, and I'll drop her off and pick her up, or just wait. Mm-hmm. For her, but or run the errands that she would have run. but as far as the medication goes, gee, lots of things have improved. The whole thing of hope, that something that has no or hardly any side effects could actually be beneficial and reduce or remove a symptom set. Well, how much better can it get? It's just incredible. And I think people, PJ, my wife, responds to that with joy. It's a joyful outcome, which makes me feel better, of course. And it's not a gloomy affair. It's a rather exciting, actually. And it's not a drug that's on a blacklist or in a cancer-causing sort of problem, or those drugs that really are very dangerous if you take them over time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both very much for sharing your experience. It was quite an education. Yes, thank you.
Do you have LDN experience to share? If so, please email me, linda@ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you.